And welcome to Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. I'm Vasa Janopoulos, manager of the National Design Awards, and I'm so glad you all joined us for this dynamic evening of vibrant international perspectives on design. Cooper Hewitt is America's design museum. Our vision is for everyone to discover the importance of design and its power to change the world. We celebrate design's life-enhancing, problem-solving impact every day with groundbreaking exhibitions like our much-anticipated Nature Cooper Hewitt Design Triennial, dedicated to nature and design's response to climate change, which opens on May 10th. Cooper Hewitt is the platform for these important conversations on the power of design, and I encourage you to visit often to be inspired by our collection, our exhibitions, and our education programs. All year, I work very closely with our National Design Award winners. They are fantastic designers, but also amazing people. I'm thrilled to be able to welcome two of them tonight. John Christakos, founder of Minneapolis-based Blue Dot, our 2018 product design winner, and Mikyoung Kim, founding principal of Boston-based Mikyoung Kim Design, our 2018 landscape architecture winner. I'm also very pleased to welcome winners of Singapore's President's Design Awards, who spent yesterday afternoon with our high school scholars investigating space and prototyping objects. Hengwei Fua, director of WOHA Architects, two-time Design of the Year recipient, and Designer of the Year awardee Hans Tan, founder of Hans Tan Studio and assistant professor in the Division of Industrial Design at the National University of Singapore. The National Design Awards honor excellence, innovation, and lasting achievement in American design. It's our most prominent educational initiative, and like Singapore's President's Design Awards, it extends well beyond an award ceremony, bringing design and design thinking to people across the country and, of course, right here in New York. This year, we are celebrating 20 years of the National Design Awards, so be on the lookout for our National Design Week lineup of programs that will run from October 15th through 19th to be announced later this summer. Tonight's panel is a joint effort with Singapore's National Agency for Design, the DesignSingapore Council, as we share a common vision of celebrating meaningful and impactful designs through our shared respective awards programs. Just last month, during Singapore Design Week, these winners, along with others, were presented side by side in a showcase at the National Design Center in Singapore. And I was fortunate enough to be there for the opening and to see Hans's and Hengwei's work firsthand. Tonight, I'm pleased that we've brought together these four remarkable designers for an exploration of the role of making in the design process. We'll hear from each of the panelists in short presentations before moving into a conversation. It's now my pleasure to welcome our first panelist and speaker, John Christakos, to the stage.
Thanks, Baso. I think we were told to keep this to 5 to 8 minutes, so I'm going to run through a couple of projects that I hope illustrate how our design process works and sort of share some non-digital, more analog methods in our design process. So I'll move quickly through the pictures, and I think we'll have time for questions and whatnot at the end of the panel. So actually, I'll go back here. Maybe we'll talk first about this chair that's on the left of this slide. It's called the hot mesh chair, which is a silly name. But here's a couple of armed versions and non-armed versions. Our goal in this project was really just to make a very inexpensive, stackable, indoor-outdoor chair that could retail for, $129 or $139. And we were inspired by the Tonnet chair, a classic cafe chair that's going to use bent wood. Two very simple silhouettes of a bent form, and in that case, a caned seat. But the process often starts with sketches, pencil sketches, and sketchbooks. Here are some of the early sketches. The piece in the background that sort of is a laser cut study of a custom mesh pattern that we ended up using for the seat. We use scale models a lot, so this are a couple of small scale models, and it's kind of amazing. You can render things and print out renderings, but there's something very different about holding it in your hand and moving it around and experiencing it that way versus on a piece of paper. So we find that that's a helpful step. And this is a seating buck. So this is a way we sort of experiment with comfort. So it's a really crude kind of device where we can change the seat angle, we can change the back angle, we can change the seat height, etc. They end up looking like kind of cool objects by themselves. And for a while, we thought maybe this chair would be a woven seat, and this is our really sad attempt at weaving. And we realized we knew nothing about it, and we didn't know suppliers that could actually do it well for us, so we abandoned that quickly. But I think the process of making sometimes gets you to that conclusion faster than rendering on a computer. I mean, just the struggle that you have physically in doing it sort of gives you a little hint that maybe this isn't the right direction. This is another seating buck for a lounge chair version. And then various stages. So on the left is, we're getting closer to the tubular form of the chair, and we're using a stock perforated sheet metal for the infill of the seat in the back, and just felt it sort of needed some more personality and life, which led us to that custom designed geometric mesh pattern, and another seating buck on the right. And here's the chair being made in production in a factory in Italy, brazing the mesh to the tubular frame, and then polishing off those welds. And then a couple of chairs in the factory, and then the finished product. So that's project number one. Project number two we call Wonk, and we're furniture designers, and we're a little bit unique in the sense that we chose to also make and market and sell our own work. So 100% of what we sell in Blue Dot stores and on BlueDot.com is designed in our studio in Minneapolis. And I think it was just maybe naivete that we actually decided to do that. I think many of our friends that are designers are designed for manufacturers and let the manufacturers do all that part of it. But it does really impact the way we think and the way we design, because we live with the consequences of our work. If something doesn't ship well or arrives damaged and it's hard to put together, we're the ones taking those calls and dealing with those issues. So we end up, I think, with maybe a more pragmatic design approach than some others that might not, take on all those steps. So this is interesting because we're not ceramicists, and we never thought really we'd make ceramic vessels, but having our own stores, we realized we needed small things. We needed stuff that, one, to accessorize the stores and make the stores kind of come to life, but also things that people could walk out with in a shopping bag. So we don't sell a lot of this type of thing, really only this collection and one other. But so it was a little tricky for us to sit down and think, okay, if we're going to make some ceramic vessels as furniture designers, how do you do that? So we went to the wood shop, which is what a furniture designer would do instead of, I guess, getting out some clay, and studied forms here. You can see the sketches in the lower part of the screen, and then just to mock up those forms quickly. We don't have a lathe in our shop, so we mocked them up by cutting out different layers of 1-inch thick MDF and stacking them up. You can see them in the background there. And here's Michael on our design team cutting some of those out. But I'll go back one. In stacking them up and making them, it was Michael kind of didn't get the discs registered perfectly, so they were wonky. That's where the name Wonk comes from in this collection. So they were just slightly off register. But as we kind of reviewed them as a group and we design as a collaborative, holding those objects and feeling the sort of edges being imperfect, we liked them that way. It was sort of a happy accident. So we sort of were like, let's just keep that there. And then, it sort of shows the process kind of shows through in the end. You're not kind of hiding the process of how this was created. You're kind of celebrating, in a way, the process in which this was created. So there are some of the forms, and then we made just a plaster mold of those wood pieces, and then those molds are slip cast with. Here's an open mold, slip cast, and then trimmed by hand in Minneapolis, and end up looking like this. Here we're focusing on color, I think, as design. This is the design team kind of finalizing the palette. So those are my 2 projects about making. Who's next? Mikyoung? Thank you.
So I'm Mikyoung. I'm a landscape architect and based in Boston. And whoever put these first slides together did a great job because I'm actually going to talk about that project as well. For us, our work is has this quality of trial and error. We kind of over the last 2 decades, it's been this process. So I guess there's a kind of experimentation, kind of one step forward, one step back. And I wanted to just talk about 2 projects which show not only do we kind of plan as urban designers what these different places are like and what their character is and what the resiliency is, but we also care very much about the making and understanding that. And so the ideas don't come from a kind of conceptual realm to begin with, and then from there we kind of fill in the lines. But it is through the act of making these things and understanding and working directly with craftsmen and craftswomen and trying to figure this out. So I chose 2 projects that are smaller in the scale of what we work on, and one is in the Prudential Center, so it's that orange blob. And I'm going to try, oh yes, okay. So everybody probably knows Newbury Street, but Boylston Street is the street that we've done a number of projects on or we're currently building on, and they're trying to redevelop that a little bit more. So this is the project. I just wanted to show the plan, but in certain ways for us, the plan is more of a strategic definer of the project rather than something that helps us shape the project itself. We don't often start with a plan. And so, it's often the site or it's the community or it's something about the place that inspires us. And in this project, it was a constraint on the project. So this was one of the wind analysis. I mean, we made it look a little prettier than the engineer sent to us, but the site's really, really windy. And so we thought, oh, well, put up a wall, and then, or maybe it should be made out of glass. And but then we just thought, let's embrace it. Let's make this a place that's all about wind. So I'm not going to really talk about the wind vanes in the project. That's another custom piece that we designed. But the whole building as a collaboration with the architects FX Fowl. This is like right in my face. What you see to the left is the peak of the tower, and so that's those are wind turbines which actually fuel the entire plaza, and they light these light vanes. And so the whole project is a kind of sustainable system. But what I wanted to focus on are these stone landforms. They create planters, they create benches, and we use the kind of latest technology. And I talk about this quite a bit in my other work, where before I became a designer, I was a pianist. And there's a way in which when you design, you're a little separated from the work. And there's something about 3D and Rhino technology that's brought us closer to the work, and I wanted to share that with you tonight. So these are some of our Rhino drawings, and what it's allowed for us to do is to actually create these and be very close to these objects. Sometimes we make them out of clay, and we haven't really saved these, so I don't have those clay models to share with you guys today. But I wanted to just share with you the kind of products that we make through our Rhino modeling, and we can deliver those directly to these stone fabricators, and they actually build these. So from a kind of large block of granite, and we go to Minneapolis, and we pick from the quarry the kind of grain that we want, And from there, we start to build. So there's this kind of this mashing together of the old-fashioned and the new, building both the kind of structure, as you see here, and then using 5-axis CNC technology to carve these pieces of stone. So you can see that what makes this unique is that it's actually three-dimensional on all sides of the stone. And what you can see in this next slide is that managing the structure below grade, we actually stepped the foundation. So when I started my practice, we would have never been able to build a project like this effectively without a lot of contractor error. And working closely with these stone fabricators, I think is, they just were amazing. So just studying and making sure each piece was in alignment. And so what we learned from this was that there's a way in which each of the elements around these seating elements create something that's something that where each piece of the bench is different. And that's generally new. It's kind of different from the modularity that we think is less expensive. But because we can use the CNC router and this kind of technology, we're able to kind of make these very unique conditions. I've been told that I have 3 minutes. So this is the second project, and I'll go through this relatively quickly. This project is, I want to show how art shapes some of our work, the outside inspiration. This is some photography work by Moray. I've been fascinated for the last 20 years, of how he uses the human body to study movement. And this is the project. So this is a completely different project in Lincoln, Massachusetts. And some of the things that we make by hand to study this thing. So it's starting with this idea of movement and transformation. And these are some wooden models that actually move and transform. And then using Rhino to study that and understand how that could actually be built. And then building the plan and the section at the end. So we definitely couldn't have built this plan and section at the beginning. It's something that became an afterthought. So built in the fabrication shop with 6 different modular Corten solid units, and brought to the site as a kind of accordion and kind of scrunched down, and then opened up and welded on site in place so that it really forms with this landscape. So it's 4 units deep, and something that the client said to us, which was, so this is actually a fence to keep their dogs contained in their property. It's a private residence. So the unit size between bar to bar is actually the shoulder-to-shoulder dimension of their 2 German shepherds. So it's a conspicuous consumption. But it's a project where this is a view from their bedroom, but it's a project where this fence sort of weaves through this landscape, and in the summer and the fall, it sort of blends in with the landscape. And then in the winter, it becomes sort of the star. That's it for me. Hengwei.
Hi, my name is Hengwei. We are here, Hans and myself are here as a recipient of the President Design Award Singapore, which is co-presented by Design Singapore and URA. And we're very happy to be here, and we do hope that there will be more of such forum for us to share about design. Right. We operate from Singapore, and Singapore is a city and a state. It's only 280 square miles. And Singapore has limited land, as you can see, surrounded by water. The only way that we can develop is to intensify and grow vertically. We only have the sun as our natural energy source. We import 60% of our water and 90% of our food. So as architects, we operating out from Singapore, we are actually very aware of our limitations. And we always try to innovate to see what we can do through design to improve the situations. we always pursue in our design, how do we incorporate greenery? How can the buildings contribute back to the city? How do we cultivate community-centric environments? How can the building promote ecosystems for nature and biodiversity? And how do we integrate provisions for energy, food, and water? So let me just use 3 projects to illustrate these ideas. Park Royal at Pickering, it's a mixed development with an office and a hotel. Let me bring you there now. So this is Park Royal at Pickering. It overlooks a public park. The architectural concept was really very simple, to extend the greenery from the park across and up the building as sky terraces and gardens. The greenery is brought up between the towers, allowing nature close to the guest rooms as well as the common spaces. And the building incorporates solar panel on the roof to offset power consumption. These are open corridors leading to guest rooms with gardens, daylighting, natural ventilation, reducing energy consumption. The sky gardens are huge overhang, providing shade and bring nature closer to the guest rooms. The 5th story here is an elevated terrace with amenities. It is bright and cross-ventilated, providing views of the city with the park as a foreground. And here you can see the pools and the planters cascades down along the edges with pavilions, providing private space amidst the nature in the city. This building demonstrates that greenery and building can coexist harmoniously. And it also shows that building can be designed as important components of the city to improve the quality of open space, common space, and green space. Well, as you can see from this picture, Park Royal Pickering has the same area of greenery within the building as the public park in front. The building is civic on ground by limiting its footprint to incorporate public thoroughfares. It shows that even as our cities grow taller and denser, we still can share and enjoy the delight of green spaces in buildings. The next project I'm going to share is WOHA Hotel Downtown. It's our proposal for a tropical high-rise to create more skyrise greenery. Let me give you a tour. Well, we wanted to create an appropriate and sustainable high-rise model that is relevant to our culture, as well as our hot and humid climate. This is a living tower, one that is porous, tactile, soft, and alive. The facade is wrapped in expanded aluminum mesh. There is a backdrop of more than 20 different species of creepers, providing green relief and natural habitats. So instead of a fully sealed curtain wall tower, we introduce 4 sky terraces and breezeway atriums. These are outdoor but sheltered, non-air conditioned spaces, opening up the towers to nature, fresh air, and daylight. The terraces that you see here are actually amenity space for recreation. They are comfortably scaled, bright, breezy, and sheltered by the next terrace above. So the tower does not take away green space, but give more back to the city. It achieves a green plot ratio of 1,100%, compensating the lack of greenery on 10 sites of equivalent area. And it shows that high-rise can be open, social, and green. So the tower does not just look like a 200-meter tall tree. It performs like one too. It shades, it protects, it photosynthesizes, it breathes, and it brings biodiversity back to the cities. The building shows that nature and building can coexist. The last project I'm going to show you is Kampong Admiralty. Kampong is a Malay word for village, and this integrated development is a prototype in meeting the different needs of Singapore population. Kampong Admiralty is conveniently located next to a train station. It comprises of a medical center, a senior care center, a child care center, a food center, as well as elderly housing, all integrated again under one roof. Well, the Sky Park gives both the residents and the public a serene space in the heart of the town centre. So this is our proposal for our integrated modern village, one that is open, generous, inclusive, green, and sustainable. With these qualities, we want to incorporate sustainability, livability, sociability, biodiversity, as well as resiliency in our building, so that they have a life and impact beyond the building itself. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Hans, I'm from Singapore. I'm a designer and educator based in Singapore. This is really all too serious for me. I'm just going to change my slides to the slides that I'm going to show. And while I do that, if you need to stand up and take a stretch, go ahead. Now, I'm an educator by training as well, or by profession. And the first things I do when I give a speech is to get my students interested in what I've got to say. So for today, I think what better way to start than to start with the Spotted Nonia series. And I'm really honored to have this piece of work as part of the series to be in the permanent collection of the Cooper Hewitt. And this piece of work is inspired by the batik. If you know the batik making method of dyeing textiles, you draw or you print wax on textile, and thereafter you dye it in the hot liquid of dye, and then you do it in many, many successions, and you and you're able to achieve very, very intricate patterns. And batik dyeing is indigenous to areas in Southeast Asia and also in Africa and Japan as well. It's a little bit different from the wood block printing you see upstairs at the Cooper Hewitt exhibitions. For this technique, what I did was to find an industrial reinterpretation of it. So what I did to existing porcelain vessels that I found, I would then apply stickers that are cut using a computer plotter, and the stickers will be applied by hand. In this case, the stickers are the black dots that you see on the screen. And thereafter, I will blast it in a sandblasting machine. So this is a machine where you apply aluminum powder onto the surface of the glaze of the porcelain ware at very, very high speed, so it gets really, really hot to remove the glaze. As you know, glaze is a glass composite, which is really, really hard. And when you removed the places that are not protected by the black stickers, this is what you get. You get the raw bisque porcelain that's being exposed now. And once you start removing the stickers, you get the colored glaze that is previously protected by the stickers. And from the before, which is the picture on the left, and after the picture on the right, the existing porcelain ware is transformed from one which is a traditional Chinese Peranakan piece. Traditional Chinese Peranakan porcelain ware is indigenous to Singapore, Malaysia, in Penang, and also in Malacca. And these pieces are made, although they are made in China, they are made specifically for these 3 regions in Singapore and in the region. And for me, what I did was to transform these pieces of porcelain that is kind of no longer used, but to give them a contemporary touch. And the idea here is the spacing of the dots, or you could say the resolution of the dots, is done in such a way where when you look close to it, you can still appreciate the dots, which is really unique in all its small little patterns, where it contains the previously glazed patterns of the traditional motifs. But when you step back and you look at it, somehow you could still start then to make up the peonies, the flowers, sometimes the dragons or the phoenixes on it. And this is the full collection at the moment for the Spotted Nyonya collection. And while working on this collection, in the year 2013, I decided to start with the Strike Ming the collection, because I was visiting many dealers and shops in Singapore to secure those Chinese Peranakan wares, and I found many dead stock in those shops. And I was wondering, who would ever buy them? I mean, if you want to buy a vase now, you go to Cooper Hewitt, right? The design store. Maybe I might go to MoMA. And you want to visit, in the case in Singapore as well, one of these really old stores that used to sell those vases. And as you can see, those vases are lying there for ages, for 20, 30 years, and they're covered in layers and layers of dust. And what I did to them, you can see on the left, is the original one. And to apply the same technique of what I call the resist blasting technique, synonymous in relation to the resist dyeing technique of the batik, to transform these very traditional looking vases to something a bit more contemporary. And in this case, the Strike Ming series, I use stripes. And this is Strike Ming number 1. And this is Strike Ming number 2. This is Strike Ming number 3 to 7. So for the Strike Ming series, it's done uniquely. So each piece is only done once. This is Strike Ming number 9 to 12. So each year, I will do a few pieces. So every time in Singapore, I'll go around finding these vases and keep them in my office. And once I collect a few, I will subject them to this effect. This is 16 to 19, so it's the most recent ones that I completed 1 or 2 years ago. And just a little sneak peek for last year, starting last year and the beginning of this year, we were working on the 3rd series. It's called the Outside In. As you can see in the pictures, as we work on this technique, we slowly develop variations and iterations of it. And in this case, we developed a double blasting technique where we subject the vases to 2 layers of blasting. Thereby, you can see the really deep embossed effect of the sand-blasted porcelain. And in every vase here, as you can see also, we kept a little shape of what was there before. And each pattern of these vases are developed from the original patterns of the vase. The next project I'd like to show is the pour side table. I'm quite an avid cook, and I love eating as well, being Singaporean. So this is the kueh lapis sagu. It's a steam cake, traditional steam cake, and made in a Malay demographic. And in this Malay cake, you can see different layers of steamed tapioca flour, and it's done painstakingly by steaming every layer and then pouring the new layer of tapioca flour, and then you steam it again and you color it again. So if in this cake, it's about 20 layers, so you have to steam 20 times and wait for each layer to cook and to dry before you apply the next layer. So for me, I was thinking if I could subject plastic, and maybe it could behave also like a cooking material. And my wife likes making macarons, and she's really bad at it. So I have really a bad share of crusty, hard, or soggy macarons. If you make macarons, you would know that it's really hard to make, right? And they call it the feet of the macaron, and you need to achieve the very brittle feet with a very glaze-like a surface. So I guess she contributed to the design as well. So in this case, if you know epoxy resin or plastic resin, when you pour it, it's really, really liquid. And the whole idea is to fill in all the spaces so that you don't have any air bubbles. But for me, I thought maybe we could do it differently, and I started experimenting with epoxy resin and adding different additives, like what you would do to a flour to make dough, and to make those pastries, and to find a method of casting a table without a mold, which I will talk about it soon enough. This was the first try. As you can see, it's just a mess, right? All the colors were mixing together, and they didn't look anything like other than something that you could actually put in one of the museums of the modern art. But I started making a lot of viscosity studies, so adding different additives to see how they would change the state of the epoxy resin, not just after it's poured, but before it's poured. So these are some of the studies that I did. And these studies took a period of about 3 to 4 months. And as you can see, the one on the left, if you pour epoxy resin just on the surface, that is the thickness of the resin you'll get. But on the right, if you add aerosol, talcum, and milk fiber for strength, that's what you get. Kind of puffs up by itself like a macaroon when you pour it on a normal plastic surface. So these are some separation timing study that I did. So to get the colors not to separate when you pour them together, because if you pour them too close together, they'll merge together. If you pour them too far apart, they will come apart. And this is the strength study. Initially, we wanted to layer fiberglass in between them, but eventually we put in milk fiber so that each piece is actually strong in itself. This is the color studies. Of course, you can't get really interesting colors from the color palette, so from the supplier. So we made our own pigments and colored the epoxies ourselves. This is the color study, making sure that each color, when placed beside the other color, could stand on its own and could have a nice pairing. This was the monochrome study for the colors as well. The pour stage study, so we poured the resin on flat surfaces and see how we could control the shape of these puddles. This was a composition. We discovered that the mixing sequence actually changes the behavior. And I have 1 minute left. Since I flew 18.5 hours for this, I think I should deserve a little bit more time. But I'll run through pretty quickly, okay? So this was some extracts of the documentation study. We made a small book of it. And this is the final recipe, the final method. And this is how it works. This is the pouring sequence that we use to pour the epoxy with 6 successions of layers. 14 minutes apart, 2 persons are pouring it for 2 days continuously for 13 hours a day. So this is the making process. We apply a demolding wax to the acrylic surface, and then we will mix each cup of epoxy by hand, and we'll pour it on a flat surface, 14 minutes apart, puddle by puddle, so that it doesn't merge. And once the bottom layer is finished, we'll put a stem of the table, and then we'll continue pouring the second day. So this is the second day, and this is the table. The top shows the table when it's finished pouring, and you flip it upside down, you get a completely flat surface on the top. So this is not a Photoshop, and this is not a render. This is an actual image of the flat table surface from the top. This is from the bottom. From the bottom, you're able to appreciate how the table is being made, almost like an inverted volcano. And this is the monochrome version as well that looks the same. So the last part what I'd like to show is, for me being an educator as well, not just a designer, I've always been interested in the idea of deformation making, or deformative making, because for me, over the years, I've been trying to find methods and processes to make my students learn making and thinking through making. And it's not the making as we know, but making to construct something, making based on what we know. But the idea of deformative making is the idea that making, to inform making based on what we don't know. So how can we deform something to gain new knowledge and to make mistakes to learn something new? So I'd just like to end off by showing this project very, very quickly. I tasked my students last semester to arrive at a fascinating piece of cooked flour with the use of steam only as a shaping tool. So steam here is the fabrication process, and the flour here is the material. I use this process for many, many reasons. I don't have time to cover here, but suffice to say, every Asian kitchen has a steamer, and flour is extremely cheap. And you can do 20, 30, 50 iterations in a single day. And we don't get in trouble with the workshop in our school. So the students have about 6 weeks to work on this, 5 weeks to be exact, so they have a go at the flour. Many of them don't have any experience of using flour. I had one student who came to me the first day and telling me, my flour didn't change. I asked her, what do you do? I poured the flour on a plate and I steam it in the steamer without adding any water. So that's how amateurish they were. But then, with 5 weeks, they were forced to learn about the material just by making it and just by comparing it. I didn't tell them what the definition of fascinating is. It had to come out from their work and their working process. So these are just experiments of one single student that I'm showing now, and I'll just show you 17 examples to end off this presentation. So this is fascinating flour 1 to 17. All just made of flour and steam, sometimes with a bit of coloring. That's the last one. Thank you very much.
So after seeing all that color exploration and flower investigation and looking at John's miniature pieces and the idea of all the outside environments that you two work in, I'd love to start by asking you all to go back to your 10-year-old selves and talk a little bit about what were you making then and how much has the joy of making continued in your practice, as I think we have all seen tonight. Roughly.
I can start. I grew up in upstate New York in a small town on a lake, and my grandfather and grandmother lived across the lake from me, and I spent a lot of time at their house. And my grandfather had an amazing workshop with this incredible tool wall, which I'll never forget, where all of his hand tools on one big wall, hung on nails in really cool, intricate patterns. All the screwdrivers in one way and the pliers in another way. And I would spend time with him down there making stuff, little model sailboats or whatever it is, just basically woodworking. So, which led me to, I think as a teenager, build my own shop and in my basement. And I spent my afternoons like looking at tool catalogs. I think so. Yeah.
That sounded mildly dirty.
Sorry. Here we go.
Since as long as I can remember, I was a pianist, a classical pianist. I'm a child of immigrant parents. My parents emigrated here, and I was born outside of Hartford, Connecticut. I was born in Hartford, Connecticut, and grew up outside of Hartford, Connecticut. And I think I spent 5 or 6 hours every day practicing. And I think the process that our studio has comes from the process that a musician has in developing an idea. And I think the way ideas emerge are like, I played some jazz music when I was in college, and it emerged, it's very much like jazz. It's you know, we have all these talented people in our office, and there are different ways in which we share and projects evolve. And I think that's why our work looks different from one project to the other. And that's why I think when I give a lecture, the biggest compliment that someone can give to me is, you know, I didn't realize that I knew your work, but your work looks so different from one project to the next. I didn't realize it was one person who did all of that. And I think that's what I take pride from, and I think that's where my background in music comes from.
Well, I think for me, I could remember my first Lego set. I think that for me was very simple, but it was simple but exciting, because the ability to put things together, to assemble things together to become something, and then take them apart and do something else with the same bricks, it's empowering. And I think that somewhat has become something that I like to do, putting things together. Yep.
Well, I don't have an ideal story. I mean, I was really bad at piano, and I hated practice. I didn't go far. Yeah, I didn't build my own workshop. When I applied to the university, I got into the business program, and I applied to design in the following year, because I had to do 1 year of NS. I had a bit of time to think about what I wanted to do, and I changed my course from business to design without telling my parents, and I only told them after I got in the course, and my mom didn't say anything until I graduated. Yeah, and I remember after graduating and having a bit of recognition, she told me one day that the day where I told her that I changed my course from business to design was one of the worst days of her life. And being a good mother, she didn't tell me beforehand. Yeah, because she knew that I was always bad in art, in music, in doing anything creative. But look where I am now. I guess you could learn, you know.
I think I probably could have matched your responses if I was given a quiz right now. How has making changed for you over the years? I know we've seen a lot of hands-on making in the presentations that you gave. Do you still use your hands as much as you did in the earlier years, or do you rely more on digital tools now?
Well, I guess for us, the design process is always evolving. We start by sketching, of course, on paper, and before we put the design thoughts into the computer and start to do drawings and modeling. But I guess the fun part of design is always the tossing the ideas around with the team, with others, to bounce ideas around. So I think that was something that is something that I think which is very enriching, and you identify what can work, what cannot work. How do you sort of integrate or hybridize different ideas together to bring about something even more, even better? So I think that in terms of design was it's actually quite critical in terms of how we put things, how we put the programs and to put the design together.
I'd say for us, it's changed a lot. I mean, we started Blue Dot a little more than 20 years ago, and back then we had AutoCAD, but we didn't have great modeling, SolidWorks or sort of 3D rendering programs. So in the early days, a lot of what we did was physical, just like I sort of showed. And then as those tools developed, I think in the early days of those tools, we were really excited by them and kind of maybe overused them, and started to realize that you could iterate so easily, too easily, and you could iterate forever, and you sort of didn't need to make decisions. You could just kind of throw up 40 versions of a design, and we sort of over time, I think, learned that and stopped ourselves and said, let's, we need to get back to getting into something physical, even if it's rough, in our shop early in the process. And we sort of get to the end result faster that way. We still obviously use digital tools it's the ultimate kind of record that we need to communicate with our suppliers and whatnot. But we have more success getting into the shop and making those crude kind of things that we make, because you're forced to make decisions and you learn about it and experience the design in a different way than you do in a computer.
Yeah, I think for us, it's not that things changed, but they've evolved because our practice has been around for a little over 2 decades as well. And it's just adding to the toolkit, kind of expanding it. So we love digital tools, but we also love working by hand. And each has its own strength. So we just kind of add it to the family of tools that we work with. And I think it's great. The more tools, the more powerful our work can be.
Yeah, I think in similar ways for my studio, as you could see, we produce a lot of work from the studio, and a lot of the pieces that you see, we make them ourselves without engaging a third party, unless it's an expertise that we need to learn. So the interesting dilemma for me is when we experiment with materials and processes. And by the way, I just shifted my studio just a few months ago, and there was so much models that we had to throw away because we had just no room to keep them. And but for us, the dilemma is when we design a process to make a product, like as you have seen, it's about how to design a process that is really complicated, so that's very hard to copy. But at the same time, it's enough for us to produce in a very modest studio that we have. So that's always the dilemma.
Do you see making as a dialogue with the materials you use? And when do issues of sustainability get discussed in your process?
I mean, for us, it's the foundation of our work. We're landscape architects, so it's one of the first and one of the last things that we do. We care about creating work that not only is restorative to the environment, helps us live in our cities better, helps us be healthier, but it's a kind of ethos, I think, to the work. I think a lot of our work is inspired by the natural world, and so it's all intertwined.
Yeah, well, for us, we definitely, when we approach design, it's also about a care of exercising a duty of care to the client, to the environment, as well as to nature. So that, in a way, has to start really early in the design thinking, in the design process. The few videos that I showed you, I mean, the greenery is there not just for the sake of planting, but it's really incorporated in the design from a very early stage, so that it's not just something nice to look at, but it's also a feature which the users, the occupants, can enjoy. So I think sustainability for us is critical. It's something that we take seriously from day one.
I always feel that I'm an odd one now. I don't think much about sustainability, just to be really frank about it. Nonetheless, some people might say that could be an important part of the works that I do in my studio, because as you can see from the vases we recycle and upcycle vases, and other than the vases that you saw today, we use a lot of found materials. But for us, we do it out of necessity, because we don't have the budget to work on expensive material like marble or copper. And for me as a designer, I think the power of design is always to widen the gap between what the input and the output. So as cheap as you can get, and as expensive and as beautiful as crazy as you get in the output. So it's about drawing this disparity as wide as possible for me. So I like working with trash and transforming them. So the vases that you see, I buy them for about $5 US. Of course, I find them in shops sometimes for free in the dump yard, and I sell them for like 500 to 500 times the price.
Awesome. We should adopt that model. spinning my wheels for 20 years.
Hans, I know you've said that a misconception about design is that designers solve problems when in fact they find opportunities. How does process and making lead to opportunities in your work?
I think one principle that we have is if I have an idea that I can think of, it's not a good idea. At least in my studio. Yeah, so our ideas need to come from the act of making, because it is something that you chance upon by accident. And such an idea, for me, is more powerful usually, and it's something that it has a little bit more originality because it came up from your own explorations. So I think that's something that's extremely important for our studio. Not sure if that answers your question. Yeah.
So I'd love you all to share a little bit about how you begin a new project and what is your process of discovery, talking about exploration and discovery and iteration until the project is complete.
I'll start. We again, because we are not only the designers but the makers and the sellers of our own work. We have to think through the whole process. So we give ourselves essentially design briefs, and we work as a collaborative. So we have when we started, it was just 3 of us founders as the principal designers, and now we still design, but we have a 5-person design team. But we'll write an assignment for ourselves, essentially. We might look at everything that we have in our assortment, in our collection, and find needs or holes that need to be addressed, and then we'll kind of lay it out as, whatever it might be, a inexpensive, well-designed stacking chair that can be retailed for $149 and can be indoors and outdoors, like the first example that I showed. And we learned through trial and error that we need to actually write that down, and otherwise, so we sometimes go off, in these tangents and find ourselves in weird places, and we're like, wait, what are we working on again? And have to kind of circle back to our assignment. But then it's generally a single designer will take on that project, and pin up early concepts, and we have a weekly design meeting with the whole team, not just designers, but sort of a full cross-functional team, so engineers and product developers and marketers, and then those early sketches will get pushed and pulled, and they'll end up being maybe 2 or 3 favorites, and oftentimes pretty soon after that it'll get into a crude physical mock-up and kind of push and pull between digital and analog tools until we arrive at a final result. And it sometimes takes, I think at the fastest, maybe a year from design brief to in stock, and sometimes longer, 2 or 3 years.
Well, I think
Can you ask the question again? It's mesmerized me.
So how do you begin a new project, and what is your process of discovery and iteration until that project is complete?
Did you want to?
Well, I think for us, looking at architecture, it's always the process of innovating. So we look at the typology of a certain building type. Let's say, for example, the hotel. We look hard at the typology, what has been done, and see what sort of innovation that we could bring into the model, the building, the design. But I think the next thing to do is to invent, to really go beyond innovation, to invent something new. So take, for example, the the 3 projects that I showed. They are actually essentially looking at existing model of the hotel or a integrated development, and see how we can put them together, put the programs together differently to achieve a product that performs differently. So I think that for us was, the process of innovation and invention was something that when we look at the project, it takes us from the start all the way to the end.
So each new project for us is a little scary, because we don't know what it's going to look like. We don't try to say stylistically it's going to look like the project we just finished. And it's I think it's a little like having a child, a baby. You know, it emerges. It's this. You start off the project with all these hopes and aspirations for it, and you don't know where it's going to go. And eventually, when it's successful, it kind of moves off on its own. And for us, we release our work to a larger public, and so it's a kind of engagement. And our work, generally, if we can complete the work within 7 to 8 years, we're lucky. So conceptualization and schematic design, which is the first phase of the work, usually takes 1.5 years or 2. And so that's part of the process, but it's really a kind of collaborative process with our team, and it's changed from the beginning, you know, when we were 3 to 4 people, where I was literally making a lot of things with my hands, and to now when we have lots of tools and we have a much bigger projects and bigger studio. So, but it's trying to keep that ethos alive, I think, is important for us.
I think for my studio, I think because I don't really do client work, and occasionally we take on commissions. Most of the work we do is all self-initiated. So we really just play around with things in the studio. It's like my own backyard. And there's a lot of projects that get dumped because nothing comes out of it, but we don't throw them away. Although when I shifted, I did throw. We seal them in boxes. You know, I'll place it on a shelf, and then we will come back to it again and again later until something comes out from it. So I think for me, a design process is iterative, but it's not a continuous iteration for me, because sometimes when you put something on the back of a head, your mind does things to it, your hands does things to it when you work on it that you are not conscious of. Yeah, and sometimes only when you take a step back and you reflect on it, you do get new ideas as well. Yeah, so for us, a lot of things that we do comes out of things that have been in gestation for a long period of time. Maybe, if you can see the table that I showed, I talked about it being done in about 3 to 4 months. Yeah, that was a special case because we had opportunity to exhibit in a big exhibition. Yeah, so we were rushing for it, and by grace and by chance, it worked out. It sometimes, and most of the time, it doesn't. Right? Yeah. So yeah, that's the risk we take.
That's interesting because I was listening to the radio the other day, and they were differentiating. They were saying, what's creativity, which I always hate when people ask that question. But they were talking about experimental innovators, which I think is just a fancy way of saying trial and error. But I have a feeling everyone on the stage is that kind of maker, because there's a different kind of maker that kind of keeps everything in their head. Like Mozart was that kind of maker. Everything was in the head. I think I read Frank Lloyd Wright's letters, and he said the same thing. And the piece of paper is just a way of expressing it to everybody else. But there is a way in which I see a connection between all the work, that there's a kind of through the materials, trying it again, having it fail, trying it again, being disappointed, and I think, it's an interesting way of working. It's difficult, but interesting.
And I think definitely a valuable skill to encourage the next generation to practice.
Yeah, you have to know, I think you made a good point that you have to know when to sometimes walk away. And in our case, sometimes completely walk away. We have plenty of things that we worked on for a long time that we just ultimately said, this is going nowhere, and we just need to stop. And so we've got a few of those. Or you do what you mentioned, Hans, and just sort of you need to put it on the back burner and let it marinate and let it steep for a while, and then kind of come back to it. So it is. I often say what we do is like cooking, and actually the business part of it is like cooking too. It's kind of like you need to know you got to start the rice at the right time so that everything comes out at the same time. You turn up the heat at the right time, turn the heat down, let it sit. So, or like jazz. Very similar.
Recently I read a study being done in just as recent as 2014 by two professors from Kingston University, and they were trying to understand the effect of making on solving problems. Yeah, so they did a control group where there are two groups of people, and one group of people had to solve a creative problem by drawing and using paper. And as we know, it is quite a good medium to use to solve problems, because you can draw your ideas, you can sketch it out, you know. And but the other group of people, they allowed them to make stuff with materials, right? And what they found out was startling, because the group that they allowed to make solved the problem better and more successfully all the time, this regardless of their inherent cognitive ability. Yeah, so for me, I think making is really a powerful tool that is present in everyone's hands, which is connected to our minds, if you know what I'm doing. I mean often we see our hands as an anatomy, right? Yeah, but actually, we know for many years now, for a century, that if some parts of your brain is damaged, you lose control of your whole hand. So does the part that connects to your hand, is it part of your hand as well in your brain? Yeah, so we often see the hand as a hand, but actually the hand is actually part of your brain that thinks as well. So when you make stuff, you're actually activating parts of your brain neurotically. I don't know. And signals does get sent and built, and funny things happen in your brain. I mean, the neuroscientists are still trying to make sense of it. Yeah, but I think it's an interesting way to see the hand as part of the brain, as with most parts of our body, and not just to isolate them as anatomical parts.
I mean, it's fascinating. We just came back from our National Design Awards programming in Detroit, where we were in classrooms and workshops throughout the cities doing activities. And we find that making always brings so much joy to young students. But the second we present a design challenge to an adult, it's all of a sudden a big burden. And I don't know where the lag is over the years. Do you love your thoughts on, imagine in all of your practices, everyone's very involved in the making exploration.
I mean, it's kind of a cliche, right, that children are very open to making mistakes and going through an iterative process. They're not looking for an end goal or a product. Or most children. I do know one child who's quite rigid. And it's not my son. I'm being recorded. It's horrible. But I think it is true. It's I'm trying to remember this article I read last month about artificial intelligence, and whatever you think about it, they're trying to teach. They're trying to develop AI in a way that this kind of machine learning learns like human beings and evolves like human beings. And when they create these contained structures, and I'm completely botching this up, but when they create these contained requirements, then the AI remains very much like the kind of systems in your car or something like that. Whereas when they allow for this machine to slowly evolve and make its own mistakes and then go back and start again and develop its own iterative process, it actually can start, it's a little scary, can start to make its own decisions on its own. And so I use that as an analogy for us. You know, I think our brains and the synaptic connections in our brains get more and more kind of rigid. I think those grooves get more and more rigid as we get older. And I think it's so important for us to just be open and to try new things and to not be afraid. Because when we design for kids and design for play, we can design for kids, they crawl on their belly, they're willing to take their shoes off and get their feet wet. And I notice now we're designing for seniors and adults, and they're taking the worst part of kids' playgrounds and bringing them to adults, like seesaws, like games that are very contained. And I think we're just doing it to ourselves. So I think to do open-ended play, engage the natural world, you know, let your brain open up. I think that's what makes us more creative.
think being creative is also the ability to always stay curious. I think especially from what I have heard from Hans, being curious about objects, the matter of making, as well as the material. So I think it cuts across all disciplines, I guess, to be really curious of how things are being put together, what can work, what cannot work, and see how best through design you could really find the best way to bring about a better product.
I mean, I do give talks about creativity, and because for me, my personal area of interest is also creativity and how creativity links with one's imagination. And when I give talks, I usually do it in a school setting, in high schools, in universities. I do at some time also do it with adults. I must say that I really dislike working with adults. It's difficult just to get them to raise their hands sometimes. Yeah, but and one of the exercises that I do, a quick one during a lecture, is where I ask them to imagine something in their mind, and I go from the obvious to the semi-obvious. For example, from an elephant to a pink elephant, with big ears, right? To an elephant with a tiger tail and sitting on a nose chair, right? So these things start. It starts from the obvious to less obvious, because you can start putting things together and construct the image. And I finally end with one where I ask them to imagine a Dixoma. Could you do that? If you could do that, you could raise your hand. Yeah. And when I work with kids or up to the university level, all of them can do it. At some point within 30 seconds, all of them will raise their hands. When I work with adults, I would say about 30% of them will raise their hands, and there is such a startling difference. A lot of them don't have a growth mindset towards creativity and the use of the imagination, which for me is something I think is a little bit sad sometimes. But I think sometimes we're also a product of our environment and our upbringing as well. Yeah, and that's something that I strive to put in the heads of the teens that I teach. That creativity is a type of applied imagination, and everyone is creative. And for me personally, I hate the term creative industry, because it makes design and art belong to a certain group of people. But actually, everyone is creative as long as you have an imagination, which everyone has. It's a part of your mind and your brain. It's just a matter of applying it and giving it practice.
It's a great way to end our conversation here. Before I turn it over to the audience for questions, I'd love to give you all the opportunity to ask each other any questions. We have two product designers, a landscape architect, and an architect coming from across the world, literally.
I want to say just a compliment. I think Hans's your work. The table is an amazing object, because it ends up looking like this, an art piece, but it's got like a 200-page manual behind it, which is really incredible. It's like this deep science project, but then at the end it's this gorgeous, art form. I love that dichotomy.
Just for it to be difficult to copy.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. Yeah, rooted in a business strategy. Yeah, right.
We can.
The climate in Singapore, I've never been to Singapore, but I imagine it allows for that kind of vegetation to grow there in such a lush way, right?
Yeah, it does, because it's the tropical area. So as long as, the trick is really to select native species, and all you need to do was just to add water and give it lots of sun, it will thrive. Yeah.
I'd love to turn it to the audience for any questions. We have some microphones going around. If you wouldn't mind just raising your hand.
I had a lot of questions, but I feel like you guys all answered them right now. But for Hans, I was curious near the end of your last answer, if you ever come across like a rut, or where you can't really push yourself, or you're just in a place where you kind of have a lull and it's hard to kind of figure something out, because it seems like you like to throw yourself in uncomfortable situations, like business school.
So it's like you're asking if I get myself in a situation where I'm kind of stuck and I don't know what to do. Yeah, all the time. Yeah, this part of the design process. If you don't get stuck, or you get to a place where you don't know what to do, it means that you're in a comfort zone. So every time you get to a place where there's too much unknown, you don't know where to move, that is the best part, you know. Because once you cross over, you do something quite interesting and you're able to create an original idea. So that's usually the for me the golden part of the design process or thinking process. Whereas I think most people think that that's the part where it's most struggle in, right? Yeah. But I think some of you might probably agree with me as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
I had a question. I don't know if all of you teach. I know, obviously, Hans and I know Mikyoung teaches. Is there anything you derive from the process? I think what I learned from your piece, Hans, is that you deconstructed, or you call it deform, sort of reverse engineering the process, which I think is, oftentimes when you have students, they don't really understand what we're doing here. They want pretty pictures and sort of the typologies they've seen just re-edited, but not really deconstructing and going backwards. Is there something that that you take to your practice from this? Because I teach a little bit, and I do get something back. I do get that fresh approach, that fresh kind of eye, so that I can make sure that you're not falling into the traps of getting too far ahead in the schedule, already planning the design, and sort of like remove yourself from that and just be a pure kind of iterative designer. So I see it in your work. I don't know, Mick Young, you've taught for a long time. Has it affected you? Have you been able to steer clear of the trappings because you taught so many kids and understand how to get back to that place?
I think you have to practice what you preach. So when you teach, you're constantly pushing your students. It's much easier, or at least for me it is, you see this glass and you say, well, it looks, these things need to be reconsidered, or you need to start all over again. It's very easy as a professor to say that to somebody and say, good luck. But you have to go back to your studio then and do it yourself, or else I think you can't look at yourself in the mirror. I think you have to be authentic and say, and I think it makes you a better teacher, vice versa, because it humbles you. You know how hard it is. You and I've been doing this for a long time. We've known each other for a long time, and it hasn't gotten any easier. And so that's the only thing I can tell my students when they're, I just say, keep trying. When they hit that wall, and it's their third time doing it because they're 23, it's tough. And all I can say is two things. The first is, if you're doing it right, it'll never get better. But the second is, but you'll be able to know there's light at the end of the tunnel. Because you may not get that feeling that you mentioned, Hans, in school. I certainly didn't. I was a terrible student. And so I was like a quarter into your blobs making stuff, and people were like, what is this? I didn't know what it was. I could never talk about it. And so I think it is a reciprocal, but it keeps you honest, for sure. I don't know what you think.
Well, I do go back to school to do critiques, and like what she said, it helps you to you preach what you teach what you do. So and you hope that the students sort of understand where the design principles come from and see how they could really adopt or assimilate this train of thoughts and see how they can put things together in their own way. So I think in a way it's very interesting to see how they could come back with a different way of looking at things. I think that for me was it's something that I do like to go back to school to really engage and to come out feeling refreshed.
That's right. The best part of teaching is the student who you tell them you have something in your mind when you're giving advice, and you have a bubble over your head, and it looks like this, right? Suddenly this has become a rectangle, and you go back to their desk, and it's something completely different, but it's wonderful.
Yeah, that's right.
And you just think, okay, this is why I'm here. After 50 faculty meetings, this is why I'm doing this.
right.
Because that's what you see, the creative process. You get to see it through somebody else. I mean, I rarely get to see it. Today I got to see, this rare glimpse, but you generally don't share it with the public, and that's what teaching gives you.
I'm still formulating the questions I put it out across, but as your design practice kind of evolved to be more than just yourself, do you guys kind of go back to thinking about your identity and your personal kind of like signature towards all the projects you do? Meaning kind of leading with a vision that speaks to your own identity, yourself, to your group per se.
I might address that. I mean, we're unique in the sense that we've created kind of a brand too, as part of our design practice. I mean, a commercial brand. So, but our team has evolved, and many of our designers, the design team has been with us for a long time. But we want to keep pushing ourselves, but we also sort of want to be true to what we stand for. We try to make modern design a little bit more affordable and a little bit more democratic, and be pretty straightforward in our work. So, we have sort of little catchphrases in the studio when we get off track. Like we'll say, that's a DF, that's a design flourish. It's just a decoration. It's not integral to the idea or to the design. So we kind of keep ourselves true, but we don't want to be boring at the same. We want to be pushed, and we like having new voices in the design studio that kind of push the envelope a little bit into places that are a little bit uncomfortable for us. Like, somebody wanted to put in the group wanted to put velvet, use velvet as a fabric on our upholstered designs, and Maurice and I, our two founders, are like, ooh, velvet. I don't know. Like, I'm not a velvet kind of guy, so. But you sort of have to let go and be like, well, there's a lot of people that are velvet type of people. Like, let's roll with it,
That's precisely my question.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, how much of it is your own brand and how much of it is your personal narrative, how you grew up, what you identify with, what culture you came from. So how much do you guys actually think about that in your practice, or try to implement it, direct to everyone on board? Like, how do you try to keep conscious of that signature,
I think it has to be authentic. So the minute you start thinking about it and you start choreographing it and planning it, then it loses its authenticity. And so it's not the answer you want to hear, but you have to kind of be true to, it's not yourself, but it's a kind of, you're an organism, your studio is an organism. And so each new person who joins the studio, they learn the ethos. Like Blue Dot's ethos is such a wonderful ethos, and once the studio becomes more known for the work that they do, then you start to attract young people who are interested in the same things you're interested in, with maybe a slightly different slant. But I think it sounds incredibly naive, but I can say personally, we've never had a marketing plan. Our practice is pretty much built on phone calls. We don't send out marketing brochures. We try to be very authentic, and we say no a lot. I think that's also a very important part of retaining things. So you said earlier it's hard to say no. Somebody said it's really hard to say no, but you have to think, is this work going to build the kind of the authenticity, the vision that the original founders had that's made this brand successful? And so you have to work on instinct a lot. So you see a range here. There's some people who are I'd say, Hans, you're almost like an artist. You know, you have no master except, you know, your own imagination, to Blue Dot, which is so like a chair can't break down, right? It has a larger agenda, and I just think you know, I was sitting at the airport this afternoon and just watching people walk by, and despite the efforts of media and fashion magazines, everybody is so different from each other. Everybody walks different, they dress different, they talk different, and I love it. And so the more voices there can be, and the more you can shut out all that other noise and just be yourself, or be the collective self that you're making as a creative person, I think that's the likeliest path towards success. I don't know what you guys think, but it sounds so idealistic. And when I started out, I didn't think, oh, someday I'm going to be sitting on the Cooper Hewitt stage. It wasn't for that. It was just, oh, I feel like I want to make something. And then make something a little bit bigger, and then help these people. And each step is like you're blindfolded, and then you see a little bit, and you see a little bit more. And I think you have to just trust that.
It's a great way to end our conversation this evening. I'd love to thank our panelists for being here. Thank you to Thank you to Design Singapore Council, and thank you to all of you for joining us. We hope to see you again at Cooper Hewitt soon.